I've been in the military for 37 years, and I've seen courage take many forms. But I'd never seen anything quite like what happened that Tuesday afternoon at Edwards Air Force Base. It was the day a room full of seasoned warriors learned that honor isn't about the depth of your voice or the breadth of your shoulders. It's about the steel in your spine when everything's on the line. This is the story of Lieutenant Mei Chen and the 60 seconds that changed everything we thought we knew about what it means to be a fighter. The briefing room at Edwards Air Force Base felt heavy with the weight of tradition. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of 12 veteran airmen gathered around a scarred wooden table that had seen decades of military planning. Maps covered the walls, punctuated by photographs of legendary pilots and aircraft that had made history in the skies above the Mojave Desert. I was there that day as a visiting instructor, brought in to share combat experiences with the next generation of aviators. At 58, with silver threading through my hair and enough ribbons on my chest to tell the story of 3 decades in service, I thought I'd seen it all. I was wrong. The men around that table were cut from familiar cloth-seasoned NCOs and junior officers, most in their 30s and 40s, with the weathered faces and steady hands that come from years of flying high-performance aircraft. They spoke in the shorthand of warriors, trading stories of deployments and close calls with the easy camaraderie of men who had earned their place through sweat, skill, and sacrifice. That's when Lieutenant Mei Chen walked in. She couldn't have been more than 23, with delicate features that belonged more in a classical painting than a military installation. Her black hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her flight suit hung perfectly on her slight frame. But it was her eyes that caught my attention, dark, intelligent, and completely unintimidated by the wall of masculine energy that suddenly focused on her entrance. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice clear and professional as she took the last empty chair. "Sorry I'm late. Just finished the pre-flight inspection on the new F-35. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Colonel Harrison, a barrel-chested man with 30 years of fighter experience, cleared his throat. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." His tone was jovial, but there was an edge to it that made my stomach tighten. "Boys, meet our newest pilot." The way he said the word pilot made it sound like a foreign concept when applied to the young woman sitting ramrod, straight in her chair. What happened next was like watching a slow-motion car crash. One by one, these men decorated veterans, who had sworn oaths to protect and serve, began to chip away at Lieutenant Chen with the kind of casual cruelty that masquerades as humor in military circles. "So, Chen," drawled Captain Rodriguez, a stocky man with laugh lines that weren't laughing now, "what's a pretty little thing like you doing in a place like this? Shouldn't you be, I don't know, modeling for recruitment posters?" A few chuckles rippled around the table. May's expression didn't change, but I saw her hands tighten almost imperceptibly in her lap. "I'm here to fly, sir," she replied evenly. "Same as everyone else." "Fly?" Major Thompson leaned back in his chair, his tone dripping with condescension. "Sweetheart, flying an F-35 isn't like driving to the mall. These machines require strength, reflexes, and balls," finished Sergeant Martinez to a chorus of guffaws. "No offense, but nature didn't exactly design women for aerial combat." I watched May's jaw tighten, but her voice remained steady. "With respect, Sergeant, I graduated top of my class at the Air Force Academy. I've logged over 500 flight hours in combat aircraft, and I've qualified on every simulation the military has to offer." "Simulations?" Colonel Harrison waved dismissively. "Anyone can play video games, Lieutenant. But when the real shooting starts, when you're pulling 9 gigaseconds and some enemy pilot is trying to blow you out of the sky, you need more than book smarts. You need killer instinct." The attacks came faster now, each man seemingly trying to outdo the last in their casual dismantling of this young officer's credentials. "I mean no disrespect," said Captain Williams, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But wouldn't you be happier doing something more suited to your talents? Maybe public relations? Or entertainment," suggested Major Thompson with a leer. "I bet Hollywood would love to get their hands on a face like that. Or modeling," added Rodriguez. "Victoria's Secret is always looking for new angels." The room erupted in laughter, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. These weren't teenagers making crude jokes. These were grown men, professional soldiers, systematically humiliating a fellow officer based on nothing more than her gender and appearance. Throughout the barrage, Lieutenant Chen sat with the bearing of a statue. Her spine was straight, her hands folded, her expression carefully neutral. But I could see the fire building behind her eyes, the kind of controlled fury that separates true warriors from mere soldiers. "I appreciate the career counseling," she said, her voice carrying just enough edge to cut glass. "But I'm exactly where I want to be. I didn't join the Air Force to be a pretty face or a recruitment poster. I joined to serve my country and to fly the most advanced aircraft in the world. And how's that working out for you?" Colonel Harrison's question was pointed, cruel. "Because, from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to play in a man's game with a woman's equipment." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the younger officers shifting uncomfortably, finally recognizing that this had gone too far. But the damage was done. In the space of 15 minutes, these men had reduced a decorated pilot to the sum of her physical attributes and found her wanting. Mei stood slowly, her movements precise and controlled. "If you gentlemen will excuse me," she said, "I have an aircraft to prep for tomorrow's training exercise." She was halfway to the door when it happened. What came next lasted exactly 63 seconds. I know because I was watching the clock on the wall, thinking about how disappointed I was in my fellow servicemen. But those 63 seconds would prove that sometimes the universe has a sense of timing that's nothing short of divine. The klaxon's wail cut through the air like a blade, its urgent tone instantly transforming the atmosphere from casual hostility to professional alertness. Red lights began flashing throughout the building, and the automated voice of the base's emergency system crackled to life. "Attention all personnel. Airspace violation detected. Unknown. Aircraft approaching restricted zone. All available pilots report to hangars immediately. This is not a drill." The transformation in the room was immediate and complete. Chairs scraped against the floor as 12 men surged to their feet, their casual demeanor replaced by the sharp focus that years of training had drilled into them. But as they moved toward the door, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Lieutenant Chen was already gone. While the men had been processing the alarm, she had vanished like smoke, her slight form disappearing through the doorway with the silent efficiency of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Shit," muttered Colonel Harrison, suddenly all business. "Emergency scramble. Everyone to the flight line now." We poured out of the briefing room and into the controlled chaos of a military base under alert. Personnel were running in every direction. Ground crews were spinning up equipment, and the distant whine of jet engines was already beginning to fill the air. Asterisk. The hangar was a cavern of organized mayhem. Technicians swarmed over aircraft like ants, conducting last-minute checks and loading ordnance. The smell of aviation fuel and hydraulic fluid filled the air, mixed with the electric tension of impending action. And there, in the center of it all, was Lieutenant Mei Chen. She moved with the fluid precision of a dancer, her hands flying over the pre-flight checklist with the kind of muscle memory that comes from countless hours of training. Her F-35 Lightning II sat in the hangar like a sleeping predator, its angular surfaces gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. The men from the briefing room had arrived at the hangar in time to see her climbing into the cockpit, her helmet already in place, her movements economical and purposeful. The contrast between the frail-looking young woman they had been mocking and the confident warrior now strapping herself into 40,000 pounds of military hardware was jarring. "What the hell is she doing?" demanded Major Thompson, his voice barely audible over the growing engine noise. "Her job," I replied, surprising myself with the steel in my own voice. The situation update came through the base's communication system and clicked. Professional tones. An unmanned aerial vehicle of unknown origin had violated restricted airspace and was approaching the base at high speed. Initial attempts at radio contact had failed, and the aircraft was not responding to standard intercept protocols. "This is tower to all available aircraft," the voice crackled through the comm system. "We have a rogue UAV, designation unknown, bearing 270 at Angels 15. Aircraft is not responding to radio calls and appears to be on an intercept. Course with the base. Any pilot ready for immediate launch. You are cleared for emergency scramble." The men around me were suiting up with practiced efficiency, but they were still minutes away from being flight ready. Their aircraft were powered down, requiring precious time for startup procedures and pre-flight checks. Lieutenant Chen's F-35 was already moving. The sound of her engine spooling up was like the roar of a caged dragon finally being released. The aircraft rolled out of the hangar with deliberate purpose, its pilot visible through the canopy as a small, determined figure surrounded by the most advanced aviation technology in the world. "Tower, this is Ghost 1, her voice came through. The comm system, clear and professional. "I am wheels up and ready for intercept." "Copy that, Ghost 1. You are cleared for immediate takeoff. Vector 270, climb to Angels 20. Be advised, bogey is approximately 15 miles out and closing fast." What happened next defied everything I thought I knew about flying. Lieutenant Chen's F-35 streaked down the runway and into the desert sky with the kind of aggressive acceleration that pressed human bodies to their limits. But this wasn't just about speed, it was about precision, timing, and the kind of three-dimensional thinking that separates adequate pilots from exceptional ones. The rogue UAV appeared on the radar screens in the control tower as a fast-moving blip, its erratic flight pattern suggesting either mechanical malfunction or deliberate evasion tactics. It was larger than a typical surveillance drone, with the kind of profile that suggested military origins and potentially hostile intent. "Ghost 1, be advised." The tower controller's voice carried new tension. "Bogey is showing no response to standard protocols. You are authorized to use any means necessary to neutralize the threat." Through the hangar's massive windows, we watched as two aircraft performed a deadly ballet in the clear desert sky. The UAV, a sleek, angular machine roughly the size of a small fighter, was pulling maneuvers that would have been impossible with a human pilot aboard. It twisted and dove with mechanical precision, its flight path unpredictable and dangerous. But Lieutenant Chen was ready for it. Her F-35 matched the drone's movements with an almost supernatural awareness, anticipating its turns and adjustments as if she could read its electronic mind. She flew with the kind of instinctive skill that comes from being born to the sky. Her aircraft responding to her were like an extension of her own body. "Jesus Christ," whispered Captain Rodriguez, his earlier mockery forgotten as he watched the aerial dance unfolding above us. "Look at her go." The UAV suddenly banked hard left, diving toward the base in what appeared to be a deliberate attack run. Its target was unclear, but the intent was unmistakable. This was no longer a simple airspace violation. This was a threat to everyone on the ground. That's when Lieutenant Chen did something that will be talked about in military circles for decades to come. Instead of trying to shoot down the UAV with missiles or cannon fire, either of which might have sent debris crashing into the base, she did something that defied every rule of aerial engagement. She flew her F-35 directly underneath the diving drone, matching its descent angle with mathematical precision. Then, with timing that had to be measured in milliseconds, she pulled up hard, using her aircraft's vertical stabilizer to literally knock the UAV out of the sky. The impact was controlled, calculated, and absolutely insane. The UAV's wing struck her tail section with enough force to send both aircraft spinning, but Chen had anticipated this. She used the collision's momentum to enter a controlled spin, her engines roaring as she fought to regain stability while the disabled drone spiraled harmlessly into the empty desert beyond the base perimeter. For a moment that lasted an eternity, her F-35 hung in the sky like a wounded bird, its flight path erratic and dangerous. The men around me held their breath, watching as this young woman they had dismissed as a pretty face fought for control of 40,000 pounds of military hardware while pulling forces that would have rendered most pilots unconscious. Then, with a grace that belonged in poetry rather than a combat report, she leveled out her aircraft and began a smooth approach to the runway. "Tower, this is Ghost 1, her voice came through the comm system, steady as a rock despite having just performed what should have been a suicide maneuver. Threat neutralized. Requesting permission to land." The silence in the hangar was absolute. Lieutenant Chen's F-35 touched down with the whisper-soft precision of a master craftsman, its damaged tail section trailing smoke but its pilot unhurt. As the aircraft taxied back to the hangar, the men who had spent the afternoon questioning her competence stood in stunned silence. The damage assessment would later show that her aircraft had sustained significant structural damage to its vertical stabilizer and several control surfaces. Any other pilot attempting the same maneuver would have likely resulted in the loss of both aircraft and pilot. But Chen had pulled it off with the kind of skill that defied conventional understanding of what was possible. Colonel Harrison was the first to break the silence. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "In 30 years of flying," he said, his eyes never leaving the approaching aircraft, "I have never seen anything like that." Major Thompson, who had suggested that Chen lacked the killer instinct for combat, was shaking his head in disbelief. She used her own aircraft as a weapon against a moving target, while flying at combat speed. "The timing," added Captain Rodriguez, his voice filled with awe. "She had to calculate the intercept angle, the collision force, the recovery procedure, all while flying inverted at 400 knots. As Chen's F-35 came to a stop and the engines wound down, we could see her through the canopy, calmly running through her post-flight checklist with the same methodical precision she had shown before takeoff. There was no celebration, no theatrics, just the quiet professionalism of someone who had done her job and done it well. The canopy opened, and Lieutenant Chen climbed out of her aircraft with the same fluid grace she had shown all afternoon. Her flight suit was stained with sweat, and her hair had come loose from its regulation bun, but her bearing remained perfect. She walked toward the group of men who had spent the afternoon questioning her place in the military, her steps measured and confident. The damage to her aircraft was clearly visible, now deep gouges in the tail section, bent control surfaces and scorch marks from the collision. She had risked everything to protect the base and everyone on it. Colonel Harrison stepped forward first, his weathered face carrying an expression I had never seen before, mixture of shame, admiration, and something approaching reverence. "Lieutenant Chen," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "We ... He stopped, cleared his throat, and began again. "What you just did up there was the most extraordinary piece of flying I have ever witnessed." The apology that followed was unlike anything I had heard in my 37 years of military service. One by one, these hardened warriors, men who had flown combat missions over hostile territory, who had stared death in the face and emerged victorious, approached this young woman and asked for her forgiveness. "I was wrong," said Major Thompson, his voice steady but his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Not just wrong about your abilities, but wrong about what makes a warrior. You have more courage in your little finger than I have in my entire body." Captain Rodriguez stepped forward next, his earlier bravado replaced by genuine humility. "Lieutenant, I've been flying for 20 years, and I couldn't have done what you just did. Hell, I wouldn't have even attempted it. That wasn't just skill, it was artistry." Sergeant Martinez, who had made the crude comment about biology and combat effectiveness, looked like he wanted to disappear into the hangar floor. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely audible, "I said some things today that ... there's no excuse for. You're a better pilot than any of us and a better soldier than I'll ever be." One by one, they approached her. Each apology was different, but they all carried the same weight, the recognition that they had judged a warrior by her appearance and found themselves wanting in the comparison. Lieutenant Chen accepted each apology with the same quiet dignity she had shown throughout the afternoon. There was no gloating, no self-righteousness, no attempt to make them feel worse than they already did. She simply nodded, shook their hands, and accepted their words with the grace of someone who had never doubted her own worth. As the sun began to set over the Mojave Desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, I found myself standing beside Lieutenant Chen as she filled out her post-flight report. The hangar had returned to its normal rhythm, but the atmosphere had changed permanently. "How did you know?" I asked her, my curiosity finally overcoming my reserve. "How did you know that maneuver would work?" She looked up from her paperwork, and for the first time that day, I saw her smile. It was a small thing, barely lifting the corners of her mouth, but it transformed her entire face. "I didn't know," she said simply, "but I knew that doing nothing wasn't an option. Sometimes, being a warrior means taking calculated risks that others might call impossible." And the comments earlier, the suggestions about modeling and acting. Her smile widened slightly. "Actions speak louder than words, sir. I've learned that the best way to change minds is to show people who you really are, not to tell them." As I watched her continue with her paperwork, I realized that I had witnessed something rare, not just exceptional flying, but the kind of character that defines true leadership. This young woman had faced down not just a mechanical enemy in the sky, but the prejudice and small-mindedness of her own colleagues, and she had defeated both with the same quiet competence. The men who had questioned her place in the military now spoke of her with the kind of reverence usually reserved for legendary figures. Word of her achievements spread through the base like wildfire, and by evening, pilots from other squadrons were stopping by to meet the woman who had redefined what they thought was possible. But perhaps the most telling moment came 3 days later, when Colonel Harrison submitted his report to command. In it, he recommended Lieutenant Chen for immediate promotion and assignment to the Navy's elite Top Gun program. "Lieutenant Chen," he wrote, "represents the very best of what our military can produce. Her skill, courage, and professionalism under pressure make her an ideal candidate for our most demanding assignments. She has my highest recommendation without reservation." 6 months later, I received a photograph in the mail. It showed Lieutenant Mei Chen standing in front of a Navy FA-18 Super Hornet, her helmet tucked under her arm and a small smile on her face. On the back, in neat handwriting, she had written, "Thank you for witnessing the moment everything changed." But the real change wasn't in her career trajectory, impressive as it was. The real change was in the men who had shared that briefing room with her. They became advocates for female pilots, mentors to young women entering the service, and voices for the radical idea that merit should be measured by performance, not appearance. Colonel Harrison, in particular, became something of a legend in military education circles. His lectures on leadership and unconscious bias were required viewing for officer candidates, and he never told the story without emphasizing the lesson it taught about the danger of assumptions. I learned more about being a warrior in those 60 seconds, he would say, than I had in the previous 30 years of service. Lieutenant Chen didn't just save the base that day. She saved us from our own ignorance. The UAV incident became a case study in military academies around the world, not just for the exceptional piloting skills displayed, but for the leadership lessons it contained. Videos of the engagement were analyzed frame and the maneuver Chen had performed was eventually incorporated into advanced fighter training as an example of creative problem-solving under pressure. But for me, the most important lesson was simpler and more profound. That afternoon at Edwards Air Force Base, I watched a room full of experienced warriors discover that true strength isn't about physical size or vocal volume. It's about the courage to stand up when everyone else is sitting down, the skill to perform when performance matters most, and the character to remain gracious in victory. Lieutenant Mei Chen possessed all three in abundance, and in showing us who she really was, she forced us to confront who we had allowed ourselves to become. The sky, after all, doesn't care about your gender, your age, or your appearance. It only cares about your skill, your courage, and your commitment to excellence. And on that day, in that sky, Lieutenant Chen proved that she belonged among the eagles. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. Lieutenant Chen taught us that honor isn't inherited, it's earned, one moment of courage at a time. Thank you for watching. What was your favorite time in the story? Please write in the comments. Also like and follow my channel for more stories, please.